So we're going to be starting a few minutes late because a couple of our board members are on their way over from City Hall, so hang in there. All right, I think everybody is here that's going to be here, so I'll call the meeting of the Board of Public Utilities for the City of Santa Rosa to order. If we could have a roll call, please.
Chairman Galvin.
Here.
Vice Chair Cowan.
Here.
Board Member Arnone. Board Member Badenfort. Board Member Dowd.
Here.
Board Member Grable.
Here.
Board Member Watts.
Here.
Any statements of abstention by board members? Hearing none, we'll move to our study session on the Emergency Groundwater Program update. Deputy Director Burke, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Galvin and members of the board. We are here today to give a study session background overview on the city's emergency groundwater program. We know it's been a little while since we've really been up in front of the board with this program and providing updates, and also a little bit of time since we were last really in front of the board getting specific direction on the program. So we thought it would be a good time to come back and give an update, give some background for some of those members that are a little bit newer, as well as be here to just answer any questions and that the board may have and any direction you want to give us related to the emergency groundwater program. So with that, I did want to let the board know that we do have a team of folks that have really been working on this program. We have a number of folks from the water department, including operations staff, as well as water supply planning staff, and then we have a number of folks from the capital projects team that are also helping us with implementation of this program. We bring in various other departments at times when we need assistance related to planning and economic development, or we have questions related to CEQA compliance. And then we also have a very experienced consultant team sitting to my right, left. I always do that wrong. Right is Jerry Nakano, who's with West Yost Associates, and he's the project manager for this particular project. And then we also have some other team members that are also in the audience. So it's a really important program. We recognize that. We know this has been a priority of the board, and we've really been doing a lot of work to get this program implemented. And we're going to go through today sort of some background on the master plan and the direction we have from you, but then also talk a little bit of where we are with implementation and some of the challenges that we continue to face as we're implementing this program. And then we'll give you an update on the current status. So just for some of the newer board members, I thought it would be helpful just to remind sort of some of the background and history related to groundwater use in the city of Santa Rosa. So way back in the day, or prior to 1959, we used to really be solely reliant on groundwater for the city's water supply. About that time, the water agency started developing a regional water supply, and eventually the city signed on to take water from the Sonoma County Water Agency's regional water supply system. So that really shifted our water supply. We really then were reliant on the Sonoma County Water Agency, and we really pretty much are to this day. On average, I would say that the Sonoma County Water Agency supply is approximately 95% of our water supply. In July of 2005, the city had two really good production wells that we used to rely on prior to the 60s on Farmers Lane. Those wells had been converted to an emergency standby status, and so we had them available as emergency wells. And in July of 2005, we worked with the Division of Drinking Water, as well as doing studies and doing our CEQA documents to convert those wells over to production wells. We started operating those wells in 2007, and we've been operating them every year since. We typically operate them in the summer months to meet peak demand. And since we started operating them, on average, we provide about 1,100 acre feet per year from those wells into our system. To give you some context, on average, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 16 to 17 to 18,000 acre feet. It's really been all over the board these last few years, so, but that's probably closely, we're more in that 17,000 acre feet range. We currently, as I mentioned, have two wells that are production wells, and those are the wells that are located on Farmers Lane. They are deep wells. They're anywhere from around 800 plus feet deep, and they're really good production wells that return to what we call artesian conditions every year. So they're great wells, fantastic, reliable supply that we're really grateful that we have. In addition to those two production wells, we also have a couple emergency standby wells. They're Carly and Peter Springs well. And they do provide some landscape irrigation for the parks and the school in that area, but they are also permitted as emergency standby wells. So we operate those wells at the city. We have a minor irrigation well also on Farmers Lane that's really just a tiny little thing that provides irrigation. And then we have another emergency standby well, which is Leet Well, but that one is currently out of service, and that's one of the things as part of this program that we're working on getting that back into service at some point. And then we also have two inactive wells, one of which is the Freeway Well, and we've had some discussions about this over the years with the board. The Freeway Well used to be a very good producer for the city. Unfortunately, due to some contamination, we actually had to stop pumping that well and eventually had to physically disconnect it from the system. So it's still there. It's completely disconnected from our system. It is inactive, and we continue to look at options for what could we do to try and recover that asset if possible. Unfortunately, as recently as a couple years ago, we did just kind of take a look again and did a couple samples to see is there still contamination, and we did find that there was. So it's chlorinated solvents contamination, and so we're continuing to look at that and know that that's something we want to try and do something with, but it's a very complex, complicated problem. We've had many discussions and meetings with the regional board as well as Division of Drinking Water to see if there's easy solutions, and there really aren't, but it's something that we continue to pursue. In terms of policy background and sort of how did we get here, back in the late 90s, the city had identified the need to develop some additional emergency groundwater supply. At that time, we had identified that we needed approximately 8.7 million gallons per day of emergency groundwater supply. And we started to look at various options for how we could successfully get that amount of groundwater. During that time, there were also some negotiations that were occurring with the Sonoma County Water Agency in terms of our restructured agreement, and other discussions related to development. And so in September of 2003, the council directed water staff to work with the board to evaluate the role that local supply would have in meeting our water supply needs. And the board actually adopted a resolution, it's resolution number 776, that gave direction to pursue development of water sources to make sure we had a reliable water supply through the building horizon of the general plan. At that time, it was the 2020 general plan. And to look at local groundwater as well as recycled water, as well as possibly additional supplies from the Sonoma County Water Agency, and also continue to implement our water use efficiency program. And then to really look at those sources based on supply reliability, cost, timing, and environmental impact. So that was a direction we received. We continue to look at implementing the program. And in addition to that, in 2006, the restructured agreement was approved and signed by all parties. And in particular, the restructured agreement does have some specific language in there related to local supply and recycled water, really wanting to encourage the water contractors to use their best efforts to make sure that we had a robust supply that was diversified. And so asking the contractors to develop local supply projects, as well as really encouraging that we have local supply capacity available to supplement the water agency system. And we think that actually coincides very nicely with the emergency groundwater program, because that's, you know, from that perspective, trying to meet that as well as the emergency groundwater program really would help us meet the needs of our community in the event of an emergency. So we continue to look at implementing the program, and then we really started to look at a couple different things. We had a USGS study that started for the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Basin in 2005. We had the desire to start looking at a voluntary, what's called AB 3030 groundwater management plan for the Santa Rosa Plain subbasin. Those efforts were kind of going along, and at the same time, the city was saying, you know, we really think it would be important for us to develop a master plan that really provides the roadmap and strategic direction from the board on how we should look at groundwater to serve the needs of the city. So in 2011, the board did authorize us to go out for an RFP to look at developing a groundwater master plan and approve the development later that year. And then we worked very closely with the board. You can see there was a number of meetings both at the board level and at subcommittee levels to work on getting the direction, getting the right information into the master plan to make sure we were really creating that roadmap. In 2013, we finally pretty much wrapped up the development of the master plan, and we decided to have that adopted. In order to do so, we determined that we needed a mitigated neg deck to comply with CEQA. So we also developed a mitigated neg deck that covers the entire urban growth boundary of the city to allow us to look at any potential area, any potential parcel within the city. As long as it meets the requirements in that document, we have a checklist. Any specific studies are needed, then we can meet CEQA compliance. So we brought all that to the board in September of 2013, and the master plan was adopted as well as the mitigated neg deck. And just in terms of the objective of the master plan, it really is the strategic roadmap and direction from the board on how we should use our groundwater resources for the city. And we're looking not only at current needs, but future needs of the city. We're looking at expanding our understanding of the basin itself. We are also really targeted focusing on emergency water supply. We had a lot of discussions back with the board in 2012 and 2013 about should we look at production or should we look at emergency supply. And we made a determination at that time that we were really focusing on emergency supply because the USGS study was not complete. Some of you may remember we had this 5-year goal for the USGS study, and it wound up taking 10 years. So we didn't have that information complete yet, and we were in the middle of developing that groundwater management plan at the time. So we really felt that our focus should be on emergency supply, and that when we updated the master plan, which was recommended to be every 5 years, which we're kind of coming up on that date, we would, you know, look again at that point to see does it make sense for us to really start looking at production. So I think that's something that is probably going to be discussions in the future. So with that, that was sort of the direction we had from the board and what's incorporated into the master plan and what gives us our marching orders for this program. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry, and he's going to talk through some of the information on the methodology and the analysis and how we came up with operating our system and the amount of emergency supply that we felt we need.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Chairman Galvin, members of the board, good afternoon. I wanted to start with just kind of an overview of the city's existing water system, just as a base. The city's water system is very integrated, and the city operations staff does a great job with working on it. But essentially, as Jennifer said, 95% of your annual supply comes from the agency. And it's a little hard to see here, but as shown, the upside down. These red lines are the major Sonoma agency aqueduct lines that provide the 95% of your supply. And from those lines, over 40 valves or turnouts provide water to the city's system, through then which the city's existing systems take it to pump stations, and then those pump stations pump it up into the higher topographic areas. So it's a very integrated, complicated system. But again, 95% of your supply is provided by the agency, with the exception of during the summer months, the 2 Farmers Lane wells do provide additional water during the summer months to help meet the high demand peaks that occur over the summer. And you do have 2 other active emergency wells for a total of 4, and Jennifer spoke about those, and those are the Carly and the Peter Springs well, with the fifth well currently being out of service. So basically, you have 4 emergency wells at this time, and there are a number of reservoirs that are within the system, both owned and operated by the city as well as the agency. So there is some emergency supply in above-ground storage, but the intent was to supplement that with groundwater storage to be able to meet the demands, and we'll talk about that here in a second. Oh, wrong way.
Upside down.
Upside down, sorry, I knew I was gonna do that. Working very closely with the BPU ad hoc committee, we had to develop criteria with which to analyze how much emergency groundwater supply was going to be needed. And so, again, some of the planning assumptions that were made are listed here, such as what are we defining as the emergency scenario? And the bookends that were determined were a partial loss from the agency as well as total loss from the agency supply. And then the subsequent question is, well, how long? And so again, the bookends were a 2-day outage and up to a 14-day outage, because the definition of an emergency condition and the emergency well can only operate up to a total of 15 days within a calendar year. So again, these are the kind of the bookends and the parameters. We had to determine, what is the existing status when this emergency situation occurs. And so the tanks were assumed to be at a volume of half full. We assumed that the earthquake in this instance that would take out essentially the Sonoma County aqueduct line would still allow our city pump stations to be intact, as well as most of our transmission mains. And then probably the biggest assumption here was that the new emergency wells would provide up to 700 gallons per minute, and that was basically a planning level assumption at the time, which was equivalent to about 1 million gallons per day, and we'll talk about what that number currently looks like based on all the data that we have. And then we were looking at the demand conditions when this would occur, and while we did look at how much emergency supply we need today to meet our existing customers, we also, the other bookend we needed to look at is at build out, in addition to how much do we need. But again, the focus was really on dealing with the customers in the city system today and making sure that they were taken care of. And finally, the assumption during a critical emergency, things like outside watering would be cut out, and basically this is bare bone minimum health and safety requirements, again, just so that we are not overly sizing the system, but just basically making sure that we deal with and provide for the needs of our existing customers. And then the thought was, from a level of service, citywide, the intent was to try and provide emergency supply across the board to all of the areas of the city, knowing that that may not be possible because of certain outages, but from a planning purpose, that was the goal that we were looking for. And then, and I'll show you in a second, working very closely with city operations staff, we developed a plan that if we could get water to key master pump stations, these pump stations located at key locations throughout the city could then pump that water to the other higher zones. So there was this kind of a reverse domino effect. If we can get the water to these key locations, then we could serve many of the city's areas. And these are the 7 areas of the city that were identified as key, and really, in our mind, we're talking about 6, even though there's 7 here, and that's because there are 2 Oakmont zones here that we basically are right next to each other, and if we can get water into the basic Oakmont zone, they have pump stations to be able to go to the Oakmont hillside area. So we're really talking about 6 super zones or 6 master zones that we're looking to try and get water to. This is a graphic that kind of just color codes and shows you the locations within the city of where these 6 master zones are. Again, you can see Central City and there are areas in Oakmont as well as Rincon Valley, so on. Looking at determining how much emergency supply had to be brought to the table. So again, the emergency wells is only one component of meeting the emergency demands. You have existing tanks storage tanks in these areas. Those tanks have been designed to provide some level of volume of water during an emergency. So that is a deduct of what you need. You have 4 existing wells that provide supply for emergencies, which is a deduct. So again, we went through a methodology and calculation in each one of these master zones to determine how much water, how much groundwater we needed to determine and bring to the table as far as meeting the future needs. And this table is a presentation summary of the number of anticipated new wells based on the assumption that new emergency wells would have a capacity of 700 gallons per minute. And again, the bookends from the demand standpoint of a two-day outage versus a 14-day outage, as well as the existing demands to meet your existing customers today versus what we need to do at build-out. So again, lots of numbers, but the focus of the first piece of the emergency groundwater program was to try and meet the existing city customer demands for a 14-day outage here. And you can kind of see that 5 to 6 wells are anticipated, most of those in what we call the central city area. That's basically the flat areas of the city, based on 700. And then looking at that same data from a gallon per minute standpoint, so assuming that the 700 gallon per minute per well for the calculations of the previous table were not correct, then just looking at the total flow that is required, this is a table. So these 2 tables are very much related. Kind of, as Jennifer talked about, so BPU, your board approved a master services agreement with West Yost to be able to move forward with implementation of this program. And based on the preliminary data, the first project work order was the moving forward with the installation of the first emergency well, and based on all the hydraulics and the geology, that site was identified to be at the Montgomery High School site. And working with and through discussions with school representatives, basically the location on that property was in the far northeastern corner behind the baseball field, way up almost next to the creek. That area was identified behind the backstop. We looked at trying to do some preliminary layouts and came up with some concepts, and discussions with the school board were initiated. And unfortunately, those discussions have been now stalled, and so that particular site and that particular well right now are on hold. We then, in parallel to that, conducted 4 what we call test well siting studies. And these were studies to identify and prioritize in these other areas that were considered high priority areas to locate emergency wells. The Oakmont area, southwest and southeast areas of the city, as well as the Rincon Valley area. And we used a very, okay,
Oh, sorry.
that's okay, we'll get them all here, just in the interest of time. We instituted a very rigorous analysis to try and come up with a prioritized listing in each one of these 4 areas of available well sites. These criteria were such, we wanted to be away from contaminated sites like there are leaking gas station tanks, and we wanted to be outside of those areas. We needed to be close to water transmission mains, so when we got water, we could connect in without a lot of infrastructure. We have to be a minimum distance from sewer lines, and so on and so on. So there's a whole host of criteria to actually come up with a list of these particular sites. And probably the most important is we need to be over an area where we think the geology would support a high production well. It's just so we have to go to where the water is, criteria. So based on all of that, and then looking at all of these 4 areas, we then developed a master prioritized list of 20 some odd potential well sites. And based on this master list, and working with the city staff, the program management staff here, we identified the first 3 to 4 sites to then look to acquire the sites, negotiate with the property owners for site access, and move those programs forward with actually constructing test wells at these sites. And we'll speak to where we are with some of those. This is a graphic that just gives you an idea of where some of these sites are. Some of the preliminary findings that, as we were looking at siting and prioritizing well sites throughout these 4 areas, we looked at there's a lot of data. There are a lot of domestic wells that we had looked at that are in and around the city, especially in some of these areas. And so there was some data that we were looking at. These are mainly well drillers' logs. And so some of the initial findings are that the actual groundwater resources beneath the city are not as robust as we had envisioned. The data that we had originally looked at, which was the Farmers Lane wells, those 2 wells put out 1,000 GPM and 1,200 gallons per minute. Those are very prolific wells and aquifers. The other data point we had was the Freeway well that used to put out 800 gallons per minute until it was impacted by others, not the city, but that was contaminated by the doing of other responsible parties. But the city was impacted because they had to shut that well down. So those 2 wells and the production from those wells in those particular areas are the exception. Looking at all of these other areas, we have drilled 9 other test hole sites, looked at a number of other data points. More along the lines of the yield that can be expected is much lower than that, or in the 300, 450 gallon per minute range, and that is still a good well because most of the domestic wells are at 50 gallons per minute or less. So again, on a relative basis, 300, 400 gallons per minute is still a good well, but the impact that has to the program is, as we kind of relook the number of emergency wells that we had envisioned of the 10 to 11 would now double, and now we might be at something more like 20. But at the same time that we're looking at this, staff is continuing to evaluate whether it's financially feasible to move to doubling the number of emergency wells that we need to have here. And again, we will be looking at that as well as other options such as maybe interties with some of our neighbors or other ways to reduce the need to replace this emergency groundwater only through the use of wells. So again, it's somewhat flexible and a little bit more diverse program here. This is just a graphic of kind of showing you the total amount of groundwater needed by the different components, the emergency that's already in the storage, the emergency groundwater that you already have, and then basically the net that is still needed both today and in the future. I wanted to spend some time a little bit talking about some of the challenges as we have been working on this project here over the last several years. And I think the most difficulty that we have had is with property acquisition and negotiating access to some of these sites, excuse me, for these new test well sites. And quite frankly, if you think about it, Santa Rosa, this city is pretty well urbanized. The only areas that have large enough areas to be able to facilitate the installation of a well, pump house, instrumentation, those kinds of things are probably in areas that are either in parks, in some of these school turf areas or play areas, and or private lots that don't have any structures on them or something. So again, the number of locations are rather limited, and then with the overlay of those locations have to be geologically over the aquifer that we're targeting, the layers of identified sites start to drop out. There's not a lot of them. So the ones we identify, it's important to try and pursue those with all due vigor to try and make sure that these can in fact be our best shot at developing new wells. But in addition to that, and because we realized that we can't just install new wells, the program team looked at other ways to try and, again, diversify and develop supplies to help mitigate the need for the emergency wells. And so in addition to pursuing new well sites, one of the concepts was to convert the existing test wells. And again, we have installed 9 of those test wells. About half of those test wells produce in the order of 300 to 400 plus gallons per minute. So those are in the range of being viable to convert into emergency test wells. Again, they're not the 700, but 300, 400 gallons per minute in an emergency is real wet water. It helps our citizens, and so we are moving forward with that to, again, reduce the amount of water. And you already have an investment in those wells. And so to convert those wells and bring those online as emergency supply wells is, again, part of our concept here. As well as we don't want to lose any of our existing emergency capacity at either the 2 Farmers Lane wells or Carly or the Peter Springs well. So we need to make sure that those wells continue to operate, continue to be maintained, and continue to be available on an emergency basis so that if and when they're needed, they can be turned on and would roll into the system. One of the items that's not on here for your consideration is also some of the budget issues here. And while your board has authorized a certain line item budget for this, based on the program that we have laid out here, and there's probably about 10 different projects that the project team has been working on, based on the available annual budgets, those projects are earmarked to be able to move forward here within the next 4 or 5 or 6 years. So through fiscal year about 21, the budgets have all been basically spent. So if this project were to want to be accelerated, then issues related to budget would have to be discussed here. But because we've identified enough projects to be able to move forward with what you've identified here. These are showing the 9 test well locations. They're spread around the city, and again, so as we convert these wells into emergency supplies, these are located throughout the city so that different portions of the city can in fact have water during an emergency condition. This is just a table that shows you the size of these wells and the anticipated flows as they were tested at the time, so that, again, you can see 300, 400, 450 gallons per minute are anticipated yields from these wells if and when they are converted. Just a listing of those top 5 wells. The Place to Play well is currently in the process of being converted. Plans and specifications are already at about the draft 100% stage. We are working on the Madrone well now, and these other wells are to be moved on next. And Jennifer, just toss it to you.
Thanks, Jerry. So the board may recall that, sorry, there's no date there, but November 5th of 2015, we actually had brought this information sort of back to the board. We had talked and reinstated, Chairman Galvin had reinstated the BPU ad hoc committee for groundwater. We had a lot of discussions about this sort of the findings that Jerry just talked about the redirection, about really looking at focusing on test borings. And we're really thinking at that time, you know, if we could really pursue the test borings, as Jerry mentioned, that is wet water that we know we'd have. And so we already know what it's like underground. There are many times when we were putting test borings in based on our best information and best knowledge. And as you might have seen from the previous slide with the table, we thought it would be a great location, and we got really no production. So at least we know that there's wet water there. We can use it. We can convert it. There would potentially be a little bit less of a cost by converting what was already an existing hole in the ground to an emergency groundwater well. And then we also talked about continuing to pursue additional property acquisition, to continue to pursue additional test borings and potential wells, and to continue to pursue potential partnerships and looking at those options. And so the BPU ad hoc subcommittee did give us direction to pursue that. We came back to the board and gave an update on that. And so that's really the direction we've been going in the last year and a half or so now. And so, sorry, I meant to hit this one. And so these are the current projects that really we're moving forward right now with making sure that we're protecting our current emergency groundwater supplies that we do have in hand, making sure that they will be reliable for many years to come. What we're pursuing for converting test borings over to emergency groundwater wells, and then what we're looking at for putting in additional test borings to potentially site additional emergency wells. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of those. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. So in terms of protecting the existing facilities, the board has seen in particular the Farmers Lane well upgrades and treatment plant project before them a couple of months, I think earlier this year. But really we are looking at making sure that we're continuing to be able to use those wells at the capacity we were hoping for. We do know that we need to basically upsize the pumps, we need to get some additional electrical out there, and then we need to do some upgrades to the treatment facility so that we can really make sure we can continue to rely on those wells to produce approximately 2,500 gallons per minute. Right now, as the wells are used throughout the summer, that production capacity does go down, and so we're looking at a number of upgrades that will help us keep that throughout the whole pumping season. We are looking at really focusing on making the upgrades and repairs that are needed for Carly and Peters Spring in the next fiscal year. And one thing I do want to say is, you know, we kind of plan this out and we show you a 5-year CIP, but we recognize that the board only adopts year one. And so this is sort of the roadmap we have right now, but we will continue to work, evaluate, reevaluate that budget and continue to work with the board. So this is, you know, sort of the planning purposes where we think we're going, but those are always decisions we revisit. And then in terms of Leet Well, really looking to bring that back online, we need to do an analysis first and evaluate what that's going to take. And so we're looking again at trying to do that in fiscal year 18-19. Gosh, what is wrong with me? Sorry. I don't know. I think I'm used to a laptop. Sorry. And then in terms of the conversions of test borings, we are focusing on 2 right now, with a place to play being the first one. We are just about complete with design, and we're been working really closely with the Rec and Parks Department. Because this is at a park, we have to do a master plan amendment. So we've been working with them on that. That's gone to the Board of Community Services already. And then the next step is that it would have to go to City Council and be approved. And if it's approved, then we can go ahead and get that project out to construction. So we're doing sort of the design and the master plan amendment in parallel. The Board of Community Services did recommend the amendment to the master plan to include this emergency well. And then we are also looking at Madrone School. And so we had good conversations with the school, with the superintendents and the folks at the school board. They were supportive. However, there was a misunderstanding of sort of what they were doing in terms of a project for building a track at the school and where the easement was laid out. And so after they had put it out already for notice and had their initial board hearing, they realized that actually they couldn't grant the size of the easement that we were looking at. So we've regrouped with them. We're continuing to talk and have discussions, and we're working directly as well with their designer this time, not just with the staff, And we think we found a smaller easement that will work and a footprint that we can use that will allow us to really use that existing test boring. Because, like I said, we'd really like to use the holes that we already have in the ground, and so converting that as opposed to putting a new one in close by. So we think that's still optimistic, and we're continuing to work closely with them. Okay, just move this a little bit further from me. Oh, no. And then in terms of the Oakmont treatment, in terms of new sites, we were really looking at the potential for a well at the Oakmont treatment plant. That site is pretty encumbered, and there's a lot of constraints. And so the initial analysis is showing that we probably won't be able to put a emergency well in there with the constraints of everything that's on the property, including setbacks from the creek and setbacks from the sewer, et cetera. We're taking one last look just to make sure, but it may be that we aren't able to pursue that site after all, but we're really doing our due diligence there. And then we are also working closely on putting a new test boring and potential emergency well at the Spears Road location that the board authorized purchasing late last year. We did send out initial communications to the residents, and there were some concerns that came up. And so we did hold an initial community meeting with the residents in May. And they continue to have some concerns and have expressed those to the council. In particular, they just want to understand if there will be any potential effects to their wells. They want to understand how the street's going to be affected. They want to understand how the project will blend in with the neighborhood. So they've raised a number of concerns. So we've planned a second community meeting that we're going to have next Wednesday, June the 21st, and really try and have more discussion with them and see if we can be able to answer questions that they have and continue to move that site forward. So, and related to that, one of the things that we wanted to show the board, and I'm actually going to have Jerry just talk about this a little more in depth, but really is the cross-section of what we're looking at, what we're trying to target in terms of the groundwater aquifer. We are not looking at a shallow well. We are not looking to have any kind of impact or effect to the wells that those in the community have. I believe our understanding from their information is their wells range anywhere from 25 to maybe 175 or 200 feet. What we're looking at is a well that really would be anywhere from 600 feet deep on, and we're really targeting a specific part of the aquifer that we really don't think would have an impact to their ability to continue to use their wells. Plus, we're really looking at it as an emergency supply. So I was going to have Jerry just walk you through a little bit of both of the cross-section and the diagram.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. So this cross-section, from a technical basis, we are concerned with and understand the need to minimize or the potential for impact to the existing users. So this conceptual cross-section was developed based on all the available real data at the Spears Road site that we have from existing domestic wells in and around the area. And you can see that there are, in the vertical direction, three what we'll call different aquifers. Most of the domestic wells in and around the area are less than 200 feet deep, in the 190 feet or less. And those wells are tapping what we call the younger alluvial materials, and these are the kind of the sands and gravels that are most recent. Beneath that is some older materials that, again, also yield water, but most of the domestic wells don't go to that depth. And the target of our emergency test well is really in the layer beneath that, which is the Sonoma volcanics. And the Sonoma volcanics are the formations that the Farmers Lane wells have tapped into. And again, we don't have wells this deep in that area, which is part of why this is an exploratory test hole, but that is what we are targeting. So it's a very different aquifer than those that are currently being utilized by the existing property owners. Because of, whoops, now you have me doing it, I'm going the wrong way. I'm still going the wrong way. Okay, hang on here. Let me get to the well. So The proposed well construction is consistent with the idea of minimizing, if not eliminating, the potential for impact to the existing users. So the screen openings for the well are not anticipated to occur until a depth of 550 feet. So again, we're trying to bypass that whole upper aquifer that is currently being primarily utilized by the existing users. And again, this is all hypothetical because we really don't have the data yet, which is part of why this is an exploratory hole. But based on the available information, this is what we are looking for, and this is what we are hoping to achieve here with tapping into a isolated, different aquifer than that which is currently being used by existing residents.
So that's the update on where we are with the emergency groundwater program and everything that we're moving forward with. It's a number of different projects, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you.
Board Member Dowd.
I appointed myself to the first ad hoc groundwater committee along with a couple of other members, and I guess the longer I was on it, the more frustrated I became. What a surprise, government rules get in the way. I was not aware at the time of the difference in permitting requirements for an emergency well and a full production well. We came up initially with the concept that if we could put the wells on park and rec property or school property, they could use the water, so they were getting a benefit out of it, and the only stipulation of that would have been that if there was an emergency, we got to take the keys back. That doesn't appear to be a viable solution. So then we were stuck in the area where it's emergency wells, and how are we going to find them and cite them, and all the things that the presentation today had put forth. The city is cursed, I think everyone knows, with the Rogers Creek Fault that runs through north-south through what was Sinead Road, the hospital up there, Sutter Hospital, Memorial Hospital, Doyle Park School. It goes right through that area. And our water supply, the bulk of our water supply as presented today comes from the west, and a lot of it has to get to the east of that fault. So in my opinion, personally, it's one of the Achilles heels in our system that we really, really need to find a solution for. I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure that someday out in the future, this community will suffer from another earthquake on that fault. Keep our fingers and toes crossed, but it probably is likely that's going to happen. The other thing that has happened historically also is because a part of our water supply from the Sonoma County Water Agency comes through surface flow in Dry Creek and Russian River. And so we have had some incidents where chemical spills have occurred which shut the system down. And so that's another possibility of disruption to our water supply. So I really do support what was mentioned, and that is, let's keep going forward with groundwater emergency wells, but also look for other solutions that may be out there to supplement our system, depending on what kind of tragedy hits us. But I am also going to say that the Water Agency has been doing some things over the fault to be able to isolate the trunk lines, so that we would only have to go overhead for a short period, a short distance to get the system back operational with temporary lines above ground. They did one on Sonoma Avenue. I think they did one on 3rd Street, and I think maybe 9th Street, but I'm not quite sure about that one.
They've done a number of isolation valves, yes.
And that gives us a little bit more insurance policy. And then I also want to say that I think it's quite wonderful that you've named one of the wells after our chairman. But I think all of us feel frustrated that this has gone so long and we've spent a lot of money, but it's absolutely necessary that we carry this to fruition, in my opinion. So those are my comments.
Other board member questions or comments? Board Member Grable?
Questions. Educate me a little bit on, like, what are the kind of the scope of vulnerabilities to the supply?
Well, so as Board Member Dowd mentioned, the issues that we were really looking at were potential disruption to the Sonoma County Water Agency's system. So as we mentioned, there were 95% of our supply comes from the Sonoma County Water Agency. Although we have a number of turnouts and a lot of reliability and redundancy, there are basically two main aqueducts or transmission systems that feed our system from the Sonoma County Water Agency, with a number of turnouts to our system. They have been, as Board Member Dowd mentioned, putting in a lot of isolation valves and really helping improve that vulnerability. One of the things we've talked about actually just earlier today as part of our team meeting was really trying to reach back out to the water agency and see, do they have updated information on where they're thinking their vulnerable spots really are. But what we're really concerned about is any kind of disruption to their supply, whether it's, as was mentioned, there was a chemical spill in a number of years ago, but that did occur where I think it was a formaldehyde tanker that fell into the river and contaminated the water supply. And also earthquake really is what we're looking at. So anything that could...
And the earthquake is more about the distribution system and the network as opposed to the supply itself, or?
Yeah, so with an earthquake, what we're really worried about, and on that map, you saw that line, that's the Rogers Creek Fault, right?
Right.
And as Board Member Dowd, it really kind of bisects our city. And so we're really concerned that with a major earthquake, although with the isolation valves we're better, any kind of disconnection to the water agency system or disruption so that they lose pressure, can't get water into our system, or are limited to what's in their tanks and using that. So it's just really trying to make sure that if there's an interruption, we believe that they could have repairs and things made up in that sort of 14-day, 15-day emergency scenario. So that's really what we were looking for, but really trying to get the system back up and running and connected.
What's the 14, 15 day, what is that based on?
So 15 days is the number of days that an emergency well can operate in a calendar year. So that's what's permitted.
Regulation, okay.
Regulation.
Not in terms of how quickly you think you can fix a water supply. Okay, I was
No,
like, that's
but-
optimistic, okay.
But the thought is that major, connections could be reestablished during that time. And we have a very robust emergency department operations center where we run scenarios and look at making repairs and making sure we have response protocols in terms of an emergency. So, we think that with everything that sort of comes into play when a major catastrophic event happens, and the resources that could be available from other communities, depending upon where they're coming from, that it's likely that, systems will get repaired and back and running. Our top priority really is to try and get the water system back up and running in terms of making sure there's water for fires, there's water for hospitals, it's for those emergency needs. So,
Okay.
So the supply piece that sort of helps with that would be that groundwater piece, and looking at potentially those super zone scenarios where we could try and get water to those areas. It doesn't mean that we think we would have water to every single household, but we think we'd have water to areas of the city where
Zones,
people
okay.
could come and get it
Is it,
potentially.
and is that part of how you're choosing locations for the wells? Yes. Okay. And then I guess my next question would be, is there you're talking about, is this sort of like a phreatic zone, long fossil aquifer that are you getting down that deep? If you're talking about the volcanic area, I mean, that's a confined aquifer at that point?
Yes, yes, it is.
So then that's not, there isn't really a possibility of recharge for that, right?
Well, no, there is. The recharge is probably on the far east edges of the valley here.
Okay.
With fill on top, and so basically it By the time it gets to the middle of the valley, it is now a
Okay.
confined lake.
So there's not like an aquitard that like prevents that necessarily, or?
It's not a uniform aquitard.
Okay.
It's, yeah.
And the only reason I ask is if that's the backup, then, and we use that, say, for an earthquake, and then there's a spill, what's the backup to the backup, you know?
Any other board member questions or comments? Well, I would certainly echo what Board Member Dowd had to say. I think staff and the consultants have done a remarkable job of having to kind of retool and maybe go in a little different direction to make sure that we take advantage of those test borings that we already have and hopefully can convert them for less money. And even though it may not generate all the water we need, it's a start, and we were kind of behind the curve, and we're just going to have to keep pushing. So thank you for your presentation, and keep us updated.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have no minutes to approve. We have one staff briefing on Water Operations Division overview.
If I could just introduce this presentation. This is Rick Santorini, our water superintendent. And the idea behind this presentation is to periodically give the board an insight, a window into the work that occurs day to day that typically aren't driven by projects, so you don't often hear about it, but it is the backbone of the department, of the city's water system. And it's really great work that is done to ensure 24/7 when you open the tap, there's safe and reliable water.
Mr. Santorini, welcome.
All right. Well, good afternoon, Chairman Galvin, members of the board. Thank you for having me here. I'm going to give an overview of the water operations side of our wastewater local operations. I start with a picture of our crews here because they're the actual stars of the system that make it work. So they're here in front of the UFO. This is back when our previous deputy director retired. Anyway, so my outline, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the Santa Rosa water. I know Jennifer already did some of the history stuff. Thank you. And you know, I got my degree in history. I did my 20s going to college, getting a degree in history. So anytime I can validate that experience, I like to use it. So we're going to talk about the duties that our operators, what our section fulfills, the rules and regulations that we have to comply with. I'm going to go over the organization itself as it pertains to the section that I manage, which is the assets maintained, the USOs themselves, the crew responsibilities. I can read, so it works for me. So, and our standby, and then some of the work that we do to assist others, and some highlights of our section, and some challenges that I see. So, Santa Rosa Water. Prior to 1947, Santa Rosa had two separate water systems, one municipally owned, one private one. It was called the Santa Rosa Water Works. That was, I guess, originally called the McDonald's system. And then in May of 1947, the people of Santa Rosa voted a bond issue for improvements of the municipal system that included buying the private system. So once 1947 hit, by October, the two systems were combined into one municipal water system. Then at that time, the city charter was established to form the BPU to oversee both the water and the sewer systems. The BPU then started meeting on a regular basis to manage both systems or oversee both systems, and came up with new policy matters. New rates were instituted to make sure the water department was self-sustaining, and then they started hooking up meters where they didn't have meters and putting maps in where they didn't, I guess it wasn't well mapped, and try to sort of modernize the system somewhat. So then operationally, they installed new equipment. They instituted a 24-hour control system for their pumping operation, and they started testing meters, instituted a work order system, and then they got certified by the state to operate a water system. So all this, 1947 was a big year. So, and then source of that water supply, as Jennifer mentioned earlier, till about 1959, came from springs, wells, and impounded surface water. That surface water included Lake Ralphine. Lake Ralphine collected water from the watershed up there and then in that area, and then also collected water from Carly and Peter Springs wells over by Slater Middle School. It pumped through a 14-inch main that fed the lake, and at the bottom of the dam, and I remember this when I was a kid, there was a pump station there that had a little treatment facility that fed water into Santa Rosa. So just aged myself, but anyway. And then they also had the Farmer Lane wells, which were at the, at Sonoma Avenue, where our Farmers Lane treatment facility is, a little bit down Farmers Lane. Farmers Lane didn't exist then. And the picture on here is actually the old Station 4 that's right where that yogurt shop is now, across from Rosa on Farmers Lane. And then in 1957, as the city was growing, that's when they drilled Freeway Well on Cleveland and Ridgeway and had a good producer in there. And that one, they directly injected the chlorine and directly put it into its distribution system. And then, as Jennifer mentioned, in 1959, we connected to the water agency. I guess studies were done in the 50s to where to come up with a steadier water source for the growing population here. They joined up with the what was then the Sonoma County Flood Control and Water Conservation District for a Russian River supply and helped fund the building of Coyote Dam up at Lake Mendocino. So in 1959, we we put our production into standby mode, and we got onto the aqueduct. And I found this schematic from 1966. This is like the historian in me that just likes looking at stuff like this. And so this was our system with 37,000 people. We had 6 water tanks, 3 pump stations, and 14 connections to the aqueduct. So come to present day, we are a little bit bigger. Here's the schematic of the present system right now. And we have been certified by the State Water Resources Control Board to be a D5 distribution water system. Water systems are rated anywhere from D1 to D5, depending on the size and complexity of the system, and our system is a D5 system. We predominantly get, as mentioned, all our water from the Sonoma County Aqueduct. Right now we have 59 physical regular connections to the aqueduct. We have 39 pressure reducing valves off of it, 16 check valves. We have 24 water tanks and 20 pump stations, and our population we feed is 170,000 plus. So, and then in 2005, we got approval to put the Farmers Lane wells into active status. And then so currently, our sources are the aqueduct and what wells we have, and then some of our reclaimed water on Stony Point Road here comes our sources. Lake Ralphine now is just a boating lake and for ducks, but we still send water up there for the recreation purposes from Carly Wells. So, and then this is just an overview, like you've seen it in an earlier presentation, how big our system is. The triangles are our tanks. Our pump stations. The rectangles are our tanks, and then we have the aqueduct flowing through it. And then this is all our pressure zones. So the blue zone says aqueduct zone. Those are direct feeds off the aqueduct, but a lot of our area, due to elevation, cannot be fed from the aqueduct, so we have to have booster pump stations feed us. So we have like 18 major pressure zones, and then off those pressure zones, it pumps up to a tank, bleeds back down, pressure gets too high by the lower part of the elevation of that pressure zone, it has to be regulated to make it sustainable for the residents who live in that area. So it's somewhat of a complex area. I've been to presentations where in the valley, for example, where people talk about 2 pressure zones for a city this size. So it gets a little involved. And then in our zone, we have pipes anywhere from mains anywhere from 4-inch to 24-inch. Our material of the pipes that we have to maintain is cast iron, which is like pre-1955. That was the predominant material used. Asbestos cement, which was 55 to 1985. And then currently we use a lot of PVC, HDPE, and ductile iron. So the duties of our section are pretty basic, what you would think for a water maintenance section, but it's customer service. You know, it used to be that Miles always said when he was here, customer service is our number one function. It still is our number one function. So customer service, and then we do the obvious things. We maintain the water mains and do water main and service leaks repairs. We maintain our meters. We have a leak detection program. We maintain all the hydrants, the valves, the booster pump stations, the tanks, treatment plant. We gather information for CIP to give them information on projects deficient areas in our system that need to be improved upon. And then we also do all the USA markouts that get requested for excavators for us to mark out our facilities. And then rules and regulations that we need to follow. Well, you got the Safe Drinking Water Act through the State Water Resources Control Board. We have Title 22, Title 17 as it pertains to domestic and recycled water. We have MPDES, that how we regulate the potable water discharges we do into the storm drain system. We do a lot of work that involves flushing and chlorinated water, and we have standards we have to meet to make sure we take the chlorine out of that water before it hits a creek. We also have, we're at WDR, we also have notification requirements to the state when we have unscheduled potable water discharges that put chlorinated water into a creek. Those are mainly main breaks and hydrant knockdowns. And then we have developed best management practices for all our scheduled potable water discharges. We have regulations we have to meet from the fire department and the state of California dealing with hazmat pertaining to our underground fuel tanks. We have one underground fuel tank at Pump Station 4 on Sonoma Farmers that feeds the generator there. We have to follow all the USA regulations on how we mark out stuff and how we call in stuff to get marked out when we have excavations. Obviously, all the OSHA standards requirements for the health and safety of our workers. And then we also have Bay Area Air Quality Management District requirements because we have a lot of, for anything over 50 horsepower, we have to have a permit for. So we have a lot of equipment with generators and compressors and pumpers that are over 50 horsepower. Didn't turn there. So here's our organization. So it starts with the deputy director, currently Joe Schiavone. Then it's Ron, and there's two superintendents, Ron Marenchek, who oversees, for the most part, the wastewater operation, and then me, who oversees the water operation. So Ron and I, because we're a D5 system, we're required to have a water distribution certificate D5. We also have T2s. We're only required to have a T1 because our well system at Farmers Lane has only been rated a T1 system, but we can go up at one higher than what our system is. So Ron and I both have T2s, and then we're also required to have collection maintenance grade 4 certificates. And then under us, we have our sections for our supervisors. All our supervisors are required to have D3s and collection 2s. And one thing about this management team, from superintendent down, there's a lot of institutional knowledge here because everybody on this chart, in the chart you'll see, they all started here as incoming either maintenance workers when we were maintenance workers back in the day or USO1s. Everybody here has worked their way up through the ranks, rotated around, promoted through the ranks to like Ron and my levels. So there's a lot of knowledge about the system itself that's institutionalized here. And then this slide just sort of quickly goes over our budgets. You know, the water O&M budget was $7.3 million last year. About 40% of it's on service and supplies, the rest on salaries and benefits. And what's interesting about the services and supplies is 30% of that 40% mark is just electric costs. It costs a lot of money to boost water up to, pump water up to all those tanks and run our wells and everything. And then there, 35% of the cost, 35% of that 40% is all the costs is related to our equipment, whether it's fuel, maintenance, equipment replacement. So, and then this is just how the one on the right here is just how it breaks down among the different aspects of work we do here. And then, as a water system this size, we have a lot of assets. So we maintain 20 booster pump stations. We have 57 pumps. Our pumps range anywhere from 7.5 to 300 horsepower. We have 24 storage tanks. We have about 23 million gallons in storage possibility. Our tanks are anywhere in size from 100,000 gallons to 4 million gallons. We have 19 stationary backup generators, so all but one of our pump stations has a backup generator, so if power goes out, the generator comes on. We have 2 production wells, as have been talked about, the treatment facility we've talked about, and what the capacity of that is, 3 emergency wells. Our system's on a SCADA, we have a water SCADA system that helps run and manage our system remotely, also acquires information for the engineering teams for their projects they need to do. We have mobile equipment. We have 2 mobile generators. We've got 1 mobile light trailer, 4 mobile pumpers, and 1 mobile, we just bought a mobile emergency pipe trailer, which is a collapsible hose on a reel, 6-inch, that allows us to jump things to in time of emergency. So, and then in my section, the supervisor that manages the booster pump stations also has the sewer lift stations. So the assets that we do in our section have to do with the lift stations, which we have 17 of them, 40 pumps and motors, anywhere from 1.5 to 60 horse. We have 6.5 miles of force main, 13 generators, stationary generators for those pump stations. The power should go out, and the mobile equipment, and a SCADA system that mirrors the water SCADA system, and then a mobile generator there, 2 mobile bypass pumpers, and then a load bank. So every year we take all our mobile generators, all our generators, our stationary generators, sorry, and we put a full load on them with a load bank to make sure they meet the parameters that are needed for that generator to run efficiently. So that's done as a yearly PM. So, and all this is done with our utility system operators. So our utility system operators are required within 3 years of hire to get a distribution 1 and a collections 2, a collection 1 certification. They also are required within their probationary year of training provided by us to get their Class A with a tanker endorsement. And then all our USO1s and USO2s, this is what really makes the succession planning here work, is they all rotate yearly. We have 7 crews, or 8 crews counting water quality, which is a different section, and they have a chance to rotate among all of them. So they get a well broad out based, knowledge base building up through the system. And then our seniors and supervisors, they stay on the crews, and they become the system experts to help with that training. So then our supervisors all get HAZWOPER, our supervisors and senior USOs get HAZWOPER trained. All our employees get confined space trained, they have to get competent person trained, they have to get traffic safety trained, and first aid and CPR training. Then the crews, well, the first crew I'm putting up here is the leak repair crew. It's managed by Mike Simi. He has 2 seniors under him, Dominic Jorgensen and Edward Munga. Dominic's on a temporary intern assignment now over at doing inspection work, but he's got, which his experience here helped him. And then he has like 4 or 5 rotational USOs that work under him. In his section, he does all the water service leaks, the water valve leaks. He's in charge of the leak detection program. He's in charge of the hydrant maintenance program. They're in charge, they repair all the hydrant knockdowns. They do flow tests on hydrants, do either requests from engineering to see what the flow capacity of the hydrant is for projects, or we also flow test representative hydrants throughout the city to see what they are. Because if you notice when you drive through Santa Rosa, the hydrants are all color-coded for the most part. And the color coding just isn't because we think they look pretty that way. It's the color that has to deal with what the flow capacity is at hydrant, and it's a fire standard, and so that helps the fire department when they pull up, they know what the flow capacity of the fire hydrant is. And then that crew also handles the customer service truck. So they deal with all water, sewer, and urban reuse calls in Santa Rosa, and they do all the USA markouts for the most part. And then they also help with survey information for CIP. So just a little shout out for them. Last year, that crew did preventive maintenance on 500 fire hydrants. They repaired 58 fire hydrants, which 30 were knockdowns. They flow tested over 114. They had tons of hydrants they had to repaint due to graffiti, which is a growing problem here in Santa Rosa. And then they also found 60 leaks due to their leak detection program. And the importance of the leak detection program for water loss purposes is these are leaks that don't surface. So they're just leaking underground, and until we go there and survey a neighborhood by listening on every asset that we can listen on, you don't know until someone calls it in if it's surfaced. And that could be, if it's small enough and the ground is dry enough to absorb it, it could be months, and the water loss is outstanding. So we're pretty proud of that project. With resources, it's hard to keep it going on a full basis with staff, but they took care of 60 leaks last year for that. They also handled over 1,000 customer service calls as they related to water and wastewater. They get 12,000 requests for USA markouts, of which about 4,000 or 5,000 require us to go out there and mark it out. So, and then they also replaced or repaired 232 leaking water services. Then we have our water distribution crew that's managed by Jason Tibbles. He has 3 seniors under him, senior USOs. That's Troy Atha, Jeff Silva, Jason Dyer. And then he also has 1 senior water tech, Simon Hood, with 2 water techs, Owen and John. And the water techs are an interesting position because they're a combination of electrician, instrumentation tech in one position. So it's a good usage of that. And they handle anything from 480 volts down when it comes to our pump stations and lift stations and instrumentation stuff. So that crew is responsible for the mechanical, electrical, and instrumentation maintenance of all our lift stations, our water booster pump stations, our production wells, our water treatment facility, our emergency wells, our ground storage, water storage tanks, and all our mobile and stationary equipment. Also, they oversee both water and lift station SCADA. They do hydraulic valve maintenance on all our pressure reducing valves that are off the aqueduct, all the pressure reducing valves that are within our pressure zones, and take care of all the pressure relief valves and all the air and vacuum valves. They are very good about maintaining on our pump stations for energy use, for a time of use program, where we pump it, and that's where we pump at night, where the energy's cheaper, fill up our tanks, and then let them drain back during the day. And they're always monitoring that to make sure we're staying in those parameters and we're getting good turnover on our tanks too. And then with their SCADA, it's everything, they can monitor everything remotely. We have SCADA, they have SCADA on their iPhones and tablets, so everything that can be done out in the field doesn't have to be done from an office situation. We have our meter operations crew. That's Mike Illingworth, the supervisor, Jerry Pinola and Vance DeWitt. They're the seniors on that crew, and they do everything meter related. So their scope of responsibility is we got 54,000 plus meters out there. So that's their responsibility. They got, along with curb stops, they got 180 temporary construction meters. The temporary construction meters are like the one hanging on the hydrant there that we put out for contractors to have regulated use of water for their projects. We also do all the, they have 26,000 meter boxes that have to be maintained. They deal with our AMR, which is the radio read, drive-by radio read, and our new AMI project for the remote read. And they handle customer calls as it relates to meters. They do age change replacements. On age changes, they will, we used to, this is good too, we used to change our meters out like every 10 years or so when I first came here. It was like, it's automatic 10 years. Then it stretched to 15. And then it started like, let's put these on the bench and see where they're at, you know, after we pull them out. And we're finding out with the quality of the water Santa Rosa has that we've stretched it out to 20 years, and we're even talking about stretching out to 25 years. And probably the thing that will limit, especially when AMI comes in, the thing that will limit how long we do it is the life of the battery on the meter. for the AMI radio. So, and then, let's see, I'm sorry, I lost my place. Okay, they they do all the meter box repairs and replacements. Those are any sufficient meter boxes that could be somewhat of a liability to the city of Santa Rosa, they take care of. We do meter testing, so anything 2 inches below gets put on the test bench in the shop. Anything 3 inches and above gets field tested, and that's very important because especially the big meters out in the field, they draw revenue, and we want to make sure they're reading accurately because all these projects that are coming up, they all depend on the revenue sources that it's determined by the water meters. So we make sure they read correctly. And they do curb stop repairs. They handle the customer calls, like I said, and they also resolve any issues reported to them by the meter specialist. We have our weekend crew. This crew works Wednesday through Sunday. It's managed by Tony Yamas. His senior on the Wednesday through Sunday part is Steve Myers, and then also Sky Chan reports to him. Sky helps them, but he also is in charge of the maintenance here at the UFO and all the grounds too. They have 3 rotational USOs that go to them, and then Tony also manages the yard attendants. Those are the guys in the guard shack, people in the guard shack, that handle any calls after hours and then pass those calls on to the appropriate standby personnel. So Tony's responsibilities, crew's responsibilities during the weekday, they assist with the leak repairs. They do some leak detection. He's charged with also maintaining the water reuse assets here on Stony Point and Occidental Road. He does all the manhole repairs for I&I, and anything in their surveys that they find for leaky manholes to cut out infiltration, they'll take care of that. They assist with sewer repairs. They take care of the UFO here and the Pond 2 maintenance and all the grounds around here. And then during the week, and they do special projects too. On weekends, they're it. There's those 4 or 5 guys, and every call that comes in, they're the ones that respond. So they get all the customer service calls, and even though it's Saturday and Sunday, we get a lot of customer service calls on weekends. They handle all the alarms. They do special projects on weekends to help lessen the impact on businesses and public. For traffic reasons, they'll do things on Sundays, or for shutdown reasons, they'll do a project on a Sunday where businesses are closed. They take care of hydrant knockdowns and main breaks instantaneously on weekends. There's one up here at Oakmont, I think they responded to pretty quick, and it was a huge main break. It was a 12-inch main break. It split a whole length out, and having someone here probably saved us hundreds of thousands of gallons more than what we actually lost. So they're good to have. And they take care of any emergency work, knockdowns, like I said, any sewer backups and overflows they handle. And they also do new water startups for customers. Customers will pay it out of an extra fee for it, but they take care of that.
Is that picture on top a root ball?
That is a root ball. Yes.
Holy crap.
I gotta look here. Yeah, so. And then for after hours, because we do go home, and we still have calls coming in. So we have our utility system operators who volunteer to be on standby. We have, I think, 17 people, and they rotate on a weekly basis to handle all the calls after hours pertaining to local operations, thereby providing us with 24/7 coverage to serve our customers. And all the typical calls are listed here that they handle. So I have a note here that last year they handled like 410 calls after hours. So then when there's work that we do to assist others. In the past, we have assisted other partners in the sub-regional system between Ron's section and my section. With I remember at Katati, we did a leak detection assistance for them, and Ron's crews have done CCTV inspections. We've also assisted flow monitoring people who are the group in asset management was charged with flow monitoring. We've assisted them. We've assisted people with manhole entries. We've assisted in the past the water agency with some hydro vacuum assistance. Weekends, the weekend crew, many times on weekends, the yard attendant gets a call about some other problem that's not really Santa Rosa water related, and they can't find the appropriate person to take care of it. And if Tony or Steve deems that it's a significant issue to the public, we'll take care of it and worry about whose responsibility it belongs to later. We assist public works CIP teams by potholing to get information, potholing and lateral locations for information for their projects and any kind of survey stuff. We assist regularly the sub-regional section or the regional section, or whatever we're calling it now. And with LTP, with some pipe repairs in the biosolids section, we've made repairs out there. We've assisted Geyser Operations with some flagging and other other issues they've had out there in the reclamation section. And then then we got highlights of our operation. We've been utilizing a trenchless technology for a more cost-effective way for years. We've been pulling water services. I don't know how many of you have ever gone out on a tour of our operation here, but like when we replace a water service, when I first got here, they were still trenching across the street. I got here in 1989, they were still trenching across the street. And then what we do now is we dig a 3x5 hole over the water main, go out to the meter box, disconnect the service from the water main, run a cable with the new service on it, pull it through. So all we have disturbing the street for the most part, unless something goes haywire, is a 3x5 hole that has to be filled in and repaired. That helps save the life of the street. When the copper started getting more expensive and started getting stolen a lot, and plus we started replacing water services with HDPE, which is high density polyethylene. And we also had areas, even when we were putting sacrificial anodes on the services, that we were getting corrosion leaks within 15 years. You can go to some neighborhoods like up in Skyhawk and there's patch after patch in the street because the copper was just getting eaten up by electrolysis. So we have decided to, unless there was some reason not to replace services with HDPE, and now it's in the standards too, so that should save on that. There's been an increased use in hydro excavation. Our hydro excavator, our mud dogs, allow us to dig smaller holes as opposed to a backhoe. It allows us to dispose of any kind of, when you have a leak, there's a lot of groundwater, a lot of water you need to get rid of. Before we used to just pump it out, sort of filter it a little bit and send it to the storm drain. The hydro excavator allows us to contain that so we're not putting that kind of water into the storm drain system. We have a pump efficiency program started by Ron Marinchek and then continued when Jason took over and it works with our sustainability team too, to make sure our pumps are running the most efficient way they can. And then I already mentioned about the leak detection. And then we have, like I said, I already mentioned about the best management practices we have developed for disposable of our potable and excavation water. And then now the crews are starting to utilize paperless work orders more, especially in our USAs. We're doing for the most part, we're doing most of our USAs on tablets, where the map's on a tablet, the USA's on a tablet. We can take a picture of our mark out to protect ourselves. And that's just going to continue whenever the city develops their new work order system. And then it's been talked about already before, but 2016, the well production of Farmers Lane was about 400 million gallons. That's about 1,200 acre feet, and I think it said it represented about 7% of the water use in 2016. And then I'd like to put on here how our work benefits and serves the ratepayer. I think we do things to make sure the ratepayer feels that they're getting a safe, economical, and dependable product along with adequate fire flow. And we do this by making sure we meet all the regulatory requirements and go the extra step that we need to protect our water system. And it's accomplished through the goals of our section, which is to develop and maintain a well-trained, well-equipped, informed, knowledgeable staff. And they provide efficient and cost-effective services and maintain a high level of customer service. I think the high level of customer service that we provide makes palatable, as a resident of Santa Rosa, makes palatable when we ask for a rate increase. At least, especially when people have interaction with us, they know that they are getting at least a good bang for their buck. You know, they're getting good service from us. And then the future challenges in local water. Well, I would say addressing our, money, addressing our aging infrastructure. We have water mains that go back to the early 1900s still in town. We have limited revenue that leads to constrained budgets. We have limited budgets to keep up with technology changes in the industry. I put in here past staffing reductions, and in the last recession, when we were told that we need to cut 15% of our budgets, we actually axed out 10 USO positions, I think, in 2009 or so. So, and we haven't recovered that, improving staff skills and training, I think, to keep ahead of, industry changes. Addressing environmental impacts and safety issues is a challenge. Training and providing opportunity for staff for an efficient succession planning plan with limited training budgets. Retaining the current staff we have and recruiting additional qualified staff to address the future. And then addressing migrating the effects of the volatile and rising energy costs. This year we were told to expect a 20% increase in our PG&E costs, so that's what we budgeted for. So, and then addressing the ever-changing government regulation laws and fees, because that will continue to grow, I assume. So, and that's it. Anybody have any questions?
Board member questions or comments? Very informative.
Okay, and again, it's a shout out to all the people that work here at the UFO. My job's easy. My supervisors, like to shout out to them because they make my job really easy by how well they manage their sections. So.
Well, Rick, you did a great job of explaining what all the various departments do, and obviously leadership starts at the top, so
Okay.
keep up the good work.
Well, I've been here 28 years, so I picked up something.
Great. Thank you. Item 6 is public comments on non-agenda matters. Seeing no one rise, we have no referrals. We have one written communication on our CIP bid report. Any questions or comments on that? Hearing none. Any subcommittee reports? Vice Chair Cowan?
Just wanted to let everyone know I called a meeting of the ad hoc landscape subcommittee, and we hope to meet soon to discuss updates to what's going on with the contract, et cetera.
Thank you. Any other subcommittee reports? Board member reports? Director's report?
Do have a few brief items, Chair Galvin, board members. Community outreach, a couple items. You may have seen the notifications. There's a ribbon cutting for our sustainable educational garden at City Hall on June 20th from 10 to 11:30, and we hope to see you there, particularly the chair, because I believe you're speaking. So, this time of year, we're in full swing with our hydration station and have done a number of events already and have 13, and they're continuing to add booked for the use. It's turned out to be a pretty popular enhancement for community events, as you have probably seen or can imagine. Did want to note that we're going to be providing a staff briefing for the board with more details on this, but did want to share with you that the Sonoma County Solid Waste Agency is in the process of looking for a regional compost facility. And we've been talking with them for some time casually that there may be opportunities to look at a site in our buffer property around our treatment plant. For one, it's there, and it'd be nice to benefit the ratepayers with some type of lease arrangement, and also there's potential synergies in co-locating a compost facility of that. Of course, we do composting of biosolids in the treatment plant. There's a number of things that are potential. We sent a letter that I'll pass. You can take one if you'd like. And we're currently working with the agency and of course guided by Molly on what's the best process to dovetail with their RFP process. So this letter was included when they sent out the RFP, and we are already getting some contacts of interest from parties, and they may in fact contact the board members or city council members. This is a pretty big deal, as you can imagine, in the solid waste world. We are encouraging folks throughout the department that if you get phone calls from folks, try and steer them towards Mike Prince, who's the identified contact person. So more to come on that, but it is a interesting and somewhat unique opportunity, and we'll certainly keep the board apprised as that progresses. Of course, as you're aware, there's been ongoing work with the first meeting of the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Specifically here, wanted to note that there has been a release for the remaining seats. All the members have one seat on the advisory board, and there's an additional 7 open seats, got that right? 7 open seats for members of the public and other stakeholders, and there's an application process that's available with criteria or target areas of interest to inform potential applicants. Wanted to let you all know that. As you heard from Deputy Director Burke, we are following up with some comments and concerns that were expressed by the community around the Spears Road emergency groundwater site. It was a pretty good showing at a recent city council meeting with a fair amount of energy. So that's going to be coming up on the 21st from 6 to 8 with staff to what we believe is working through a communication process to clarify our intent and the technical issues you heard today that we believe will greatly reduce the number of issues that they seem to have. There may be some residual issues that our thought is, after working through meetings with them, we'll come and brief the board and let the members know so they can come here and share any residual concerns they may have with you, and we likely will have a follow-up meeting with council and offer them the same opportunity there. But we're hopeful we are able to resolve all the issues, but these things can be tough, as you know. Lastly, I believe you received notification. If not, we can make sure you did, for the annual Boards and Commissions luncheon. So you're all invited, of course, and you can respond to the city manager's office. And lastly, we are looking at summer schedules. So if you have a chance, you can respond to Sarah on availability, and between your all availability and staff's availability, we may converse with the chair on potentially canceling a meeting or two of the summer. That's all my comments.
Any questions for the director? Thank you very much. I think that concludes our agenda, so we'll adjourn the meeting. See you in a couple weeks.